It was well past midnight, the kind of hour when the world outside feels still, wrapped in silence. The house was quiet too, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of wood settling as the cool night air pressed against the walls. Emily was still awake. She often stayed up later than she should, a habit she had carried since her younger years. Tonight, she sat propped against the pillows with a book in her hands, her glasses sliding lower on her nose, her eyes heavy but restless. Reading had always been her way of winding down when sleep refused to come easily. She was just about to close the book when it happened. A knock, soft, almost hesitant, but clear enough to break the silence. At first, Emily froze, unsure if she had imagined it. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand. 12:03 a.m. Who would be at her door at this hour? Her first thought was that she must have been hearing things. But then, just as she convinced herself it was her imagination, the knock came again. This time, she knew it was real. Steady, deliberate, but not loud. Whoever was outside didn't want to wake the whole house, only her. Her heart gave a quick, nervous beat. She set her book aside, pulled her robe tighter around her shoulders, and called softly, "Who is it?" A familiar voice answered, muffled through the door. "It's me, Mom." Emily blinked in surprise. Daniel, her son. He never came to her room this late. Not since he had been a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. At 23, Daniel was independent, serious, and usually respectful of boundaries. Midnight visits weren't part of his nature, which meant something had to be wrong. She walked to the door and opened it. There he stood, tall but slightly hunched, his dark hair a little messy. His eyes shadowed not by sleep but by something else, something heavy. He wasn't in his usual confident posture. Instead, he looked almost uncertain, like the boy she remembered from years ago who used to come to her room when nightmares chased his sleep. "Daniel," he said quietly, her concern rising. "What's the matter? Why are you up?" His voice was low, almost careful. "Can I come in?" Emily stepped aside instantly, gesturing toward the chair by the window. But Daniel walked past it and sat on the edge of her bed instead. She closed the door gently behind him, sensing that whatever had brought him here was fragile, like glass. One wrong word and it might shatter. The room felt different now, charged with something she couldn't yet name. She pulled her robe tighter and sat beside him, studying his profile. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped together. And he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Emily tried to ease the tension with a small smile. "You're making me nervous, sweetheart. You've never knocked on my door at this time before. What's going on?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled slowly, rubbed his palms over his knees, and stared at the floor as though the right words were written there, waiting to be found. Emily's heart ached at the sight. She had always known her son as someone steady and self-contained. Even as a child, he had been the kind who tried to fix things himself before asking for help. Seeing him like this, unsure, hesitant. Carrying something heavy made her realize just how much he had grown, and yet how much he still needed her. Finally, he lifted his eyes. There was a storm behind them, though he was doing his best to hide it. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "There's something on my mind, and I didn't know who else to talk to." The words settled into the room like a weight. Emily felt her chest tighten. This wasn't about a casual worry or a small problem. His tone told her it was deeper than that. She reached over, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You can tell me anything, Daniel. You know that, right?" He nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. It was as if the words he wanted to say had been locked inside him for far too long, and now, standing on the edge of release. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to let them out. The silence between them stretched, but Emily didn't rush him. She knew sometimes the best thing she could offer wasn't advice or questions, it was space. And so she waited, her hand resting lightly against his, her presence steady. The clock ticked softly, marking each second. Daniel finally whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're pretending to be okay when, deep down, you're not?" Emily blinked, surprised by the question. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. But instantly she understood. Memories flashed her own sleepless nights after her husband had left years ago, when she had smiled through the pain for her children's sake, when she had carried burdens she never dared to share. She remembered all too well what it felt like to look fine on the outside while crumbling quietly inside. Her voice softened. Full of the truth she rarely spoke aloud. Yes, Daniel, I've felt that way. More times than I can count. His eyes flickered, meeting hers at last. For the first time since he had knocked, she saw a spark of recognition there. It was as if her admission gave him permission to continue, to trust that she could understand what he was about to share. The air in the room shifted again, heavy but alive with the possibility of connection. Emily knew this was only the beginning of a conversation that could change something important between them. And though her heart pounded with both worry and tenderness, she was ready. Midnight had brought her son to her door, and with him a truth that had waited far too long to be spoken. Emily sat quietly beside her son, her hand resting gently on his arm. The room felt charged with unspoken words. Daniel had opened a door with his question. And though he hadn't yet stepped through it, Emily sensed he was gathering the courage. She didn't push, but she didn't pull away either. Her calm presence was her way of telling him, "You are safe here. Whatever it is, I can carry it with you." Daniel's jaw tightened as though he was wrestling with himself. His voice was low, strained, when he finally spoke again. "I've been walking around for months acting like I'm fine. Smiling, working, meeting friends, pretending everything's okay. But inside," he paused, dragging a hand through his hair. "Inside, I feel like I'm falling apart, and no one sees it." Emily's heart clenched. She had seen glimpses of his unease, the shadows behind his eyes. But like so many mothers, she had assumed he was simply busy, adjusting to life as a young man, making his way in the world. Now, hearing him admit it aloud, she realized how much she had missed, or perhaps how much he had hidden. She kept her voice gentle. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me sooner?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Because I didn't want you to worry. You've already carried so much for us, Mom. After Dad left, you never let us see you break. You just kept going like nothing could touch you. I thought, maybe that's what I was supposed to do too. Pretend it doesn't hurt." Emily felt the words like a mirror, reflecting her own past. She remembered those long nights when she had buried her tears in silence so her children wouldn't hear. She had believed it was strength. But now, looking at Daniel, she wondered if her silence had taught him the wrong lesson. That vulnerability was weakness. That pain was something to hide. She reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "Daniel, listen to me. Pretending doesn't make the pain disappear. It only makes you feel more alone. I know, because I did the same thing for years, and I was wrong." Daniel finally turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "So what should I do? I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm tired of pretending, but I don't know how to stop." Emily took a deep breath, steadying her emotions. This was a turning point, and she wanted her words to matter. "You start by being honest with yourself and with the people who love you, just like you're doing right now. You don't have to have the answers tonight, but you don't have to carry this alone anymore." For a long moment, Daniel didn't respond. He looked down at their joined hands, his thumb brushing lightly against hers. She saw the child he had been and the man he was becoming all at once. Vulnerable yet strong, lost yet searching. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I didn't know if you'd understand." Her heart ached at that confession. "Daniel, I've lived through heartbreak, loneliness, and nights where I thought I'd never make it to morning. So yes, I understand more than you think. And I would never judge you for feeling the weight of it all." Tears pooled in his eyes, and though he blinked them back, Emily noticed. She didn't point it out, didn't embarrass him. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, filled with trust rather than fear. The clock ticked toward midnight, but neither of them seemed to notice. What mattered was the honesty breaking through the walls they had both built over the years. Daniel leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling. His voice carried a fragile truth. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough. Not for my job, not for my friends, not even for myself. I keep trying, but it's like no matter what I do, I'm failing." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him instantly that he was wrong, that he was more than enough. But she held back. She knew that what he needed most right now wasn't reassurance tossed carelessly, but understanding spoken with sincerity. "You're not failing, Daniel," she said softly. "You're human, and humans stumble. They question themselves. They feel lost sometimes. That doesn't make you less. It makes you real. The only failure would be to hide forever and never let anyone in." Something in her words seemed to sink into him. He closed his eyes briefly, as though allowing himself to feel the comfort he had resisted for so long. Emily watched him closely. The young man sitting before her was no longer the little boy who had once run to her room after nightmares. But in this moment, the need was the same. He wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be reminded that he wasn't alone in the darkness. She thought back to her own turning points. The nights she had wished someone would knock on her door. The times she had longed for a voice to remind her she wasn't invisible in her struggle. She had survived those nights alone, but she was determined her son would not have to. "Daniel," she said gently, "thank you for trusting me with this. You don't know how much it means to me that you came here tonight. You could have stayed silent, but you chose to open your heart. That's not weakness. That's courage." He turned to her then, his eyes red but clearer. "Do you really think so?" She smiled through the ache in her chest. "I don't just think so. I know so." For the first time since stepping into her room, Daniel gave a faint smile. It wasn't wide, but it was real. Emily felt warmth spread through her. This was only the beginning of the conversation, she knew. But beginnings were powerful. The quiet between them felt softer now, no longer heavy with fear, but alive with possibility. The night had brought them closer in a way neither had expected. And Emily sensed that what Daniel wanted to say next would take their conversation even deeper. As the house remained still around them, Emily realized that sometimes the most important truths arrive not with daylight, but with midnight knocks, and with the courage to answer them. The night was quiet. But inside the room, the silence seemed alive. Emily could feel Daniel's hesitation like a weight in the air. He had spoken of his struggles, but she sensed there was something else. Something deeper, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to break free. His fingers tapped nervously on his knee, his gaze drifting to the floor as if the words he wanted to say were written there. Emily didn't push. She simply waited, her steady presence urging him to continue without force. She knew sometimes silence was not emptiness, but an invitation. Finally, Daniel drew in a sharp breath and exhaled slowly. "There's one more thing," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the hardest part, and I've been afraid to say it out loud." Emily's heart stirred. She leaned closer, her hand brushing his arm. "Daniel, you can tell me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." He nodded slightly, his eyes flickering with conflict. "All my life, I've tried to live up to expectations. Dad's, my teachers, my bosses, even my own. But lately, I've been asking myself who I really am. Not who they want me to be. Not who I pretend to be. Just me." Emily's breath caught. The vulnerability in his words was raw, fragile. She had never heard her son speak like this, not even as a boy. It wasn't just about pressure or responsibility. It was about identity, about meaning, about searching for a place in a world that often demanded too much. He paused, rubbing his hands together as if to keep them steady. "I stayed behind tonight because I couldn't carry this question alone anymore. Mom, what if I'm not the man everyone thinks I am? What if I want something different than the life I've been chasing?" Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She remembered being his age, caught between dreams and duty, torn between what she thought was expected and what her heart quietly longed for. His struggle was not unfamiliar. It was human, universal, yet deeply personal. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't have to be who the world expects. You just have to be true to yourself. And that's more than enough." Her words seemed to unlock something in him. He looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and fear. But what if being myself disappoints people? What if it disappoints you? Emily shook her head firmly. The only thing that would disappoint me is if you spent your whole life hiding who you are. I don't want a perfect son. I want you honest, flawed, real. That's the man I'm proud of. His lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, his composure broke, and she saw the tears he had fought so hard to hold back. They slid down his cheeks silently. Emily reached for him, pulling him into her arms. At first he resisted, stiff in her embrace, but then he let go, resting his head against her shoulder like he had as a child. The moment felt timeless. A son who had carried silent questions, and a mother who had longed to be let in. Emily stroked his hair gently, whispering, "It's okay, Daniel. You're safe here. You don't have to hide anymore." When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer. "I don't know what my future looks like," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to keep living behind a mask." Emily smiled through her tears. "That's the bravest thing you've ever said." The weight in the room shifted, lighter now, as though the act of confession had freed him. For the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself a small laugh. It wasn't joyous, but it was genuine. "I guess I thought you'd be angry. Or disappointed. But you're not? I could never be angry at you for being honest," Emily replied. "You've given me the greatest gift tonight, your truth. And that's something I will always treasure." Daniel leaned back against the headboard, his shoulders no longer so tense. He looked at his mother with an expression she hadn't seen in years, openness. "You really mean it, don't you?" She nodded. "With all my heart." The clock ticked closer to 1 in the morning, but neither of them moved to end the conversation. The night had turned into something neither expected, a doorway to truth, to healing, to rediscovering each other, not as mother and child bound only by routine, but as two souls connected by trust. Emily realized that for so long, she had been the one holding him up, guiding him, protecting him. But tonight he had given her something in return, the chance to see him not just as her son, but as a man brave enough to search for who he truly was. The thought filled her with pride and a quiet ache. Parenthood was full of moments like this, she realized. Moments when the child you raised turned around and taught you something about courage. Daniel rubbed his eyes and sighed. "I don't know where to go from here, Mom. I just know I can't keep pretending." Emily reached for his hand again, squeezing it warmly. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. One step at a time. And no matter where you go, you'll never walk alone." He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Thank you, Mom." Her smile deepened. "Always." As the night stretched on, their words slowed, but the connection between them only grew stronger. They had peeled away the layers of silence. And what remained was something real, fragile, but unbreakable. Emily knew there would be challenges ahead, more questions, maybe even more pain. But she also knew that tonight had changed everything. Daniel had chosen to open his heart, and she had been there to receive it. That was the beginning of healing for both of them. She looked at her son, sitting beside her in the quiet glow of the lamp, and thought, "This is the moment I'll remember forever. The night he trusted me with his truth." And though the clock ticked past 1, neither of them seemed ready to leave. The night was theirs, and in the stillness, mother and son found a new beginning. The house was quiet, but inside Emily's heart, everything felt alive. She sat beside Daniel, still holding his hand, the echoes of their midnight conversation hanging in the air like something sacred. For years, she had carried the weight of being the strong one, the steady one, the mother who always had the answers. But tonight, she had witnessed something she never expected, her son laying his soul bare. Daniel leaned back against the headboard, eyes tired but lighter than before. His shoulders no longer seemed burdened with the invisible chains of expectation. He let out a breath, almost a laugh, and whispered, "I don't know why I waited so long to say it. Maybe I was afraid of losing your respect." Emily shook her head gently. Respect isn't lost when someone shows the truth. If anything, I respect you more now than ever. You had the courage to speak what others might carry their whole lives in silence." Her words sank into him, and he nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, he felt understood, not as the boy who had to live up to standards, but as the man who was still finding himself. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You know what's strange? I thought telling you would make me feel weak. But I feel stronger." Emily smiled warmly. "That's because honesty is strength. It takes bravery to show who you are. Pretending is what makes us weak." The room fell quiet again, but this silence was not heavy like before. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. The clock on the nightstand ticked closer to 2 in the morning. Outside, the neighborhood slept, unaware of the shift that had happened within these walls. Daniel finally stood, stretching his arms as though trying to shake off years of tension. "I think I can breathe again," he said softly. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow." Emily rose too, walking with him toward the door. She reached out and touched his arm, stopping him before he left the room. "Daniel," she said gently, "whatever tomorrow brings, you won't face it alone. That's the promise I'll always keep." He looked back at her, his expression tender, grateful. "I know," he whispered, "and that makes all the difference." For a moment they stood there, eyes meeting, hearts open. It was more than a conversation. It was a turning point. The son who had carried his secrets had finally laid them down, and the mother who had feared she was losing him had found him again. When Daniel finally went to his room, Emily stayed awake, sitting on the edge of her bed. She replayed every word, every glance, every tear. It was not the night she expected, but it was the night she needed. She realized that motherhood was not just about guiding, it was also about listening, about receiving the truth when it finally came. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and golden. Emily rose with a sense of quiet strength. The heaviness of the night before had transformed into hope. She moved through the kitchen, making coffee, her heart steady. Daniel soon joined her, his eyes tired but softer than she'd seen in years. "Morning," he said almost shyly. "Morning," she replied, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. They didn't need to talk about everything again. The bond had already been sealed in the dark hours of the night. But Emily could feel it in the way he sat, in the way his shoulders rested easier. The silence between them now was comfortable, even healing. Daniel sipped his coffee and finally spoke. "I think I need to make some changes. Not overnight, but soon." Emily nodded. "You'll know when the time is right. Remember, you don't need to rush. Life isn't about racing to prove yourself. It's about finding where you belong." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Her chest warmed at the words, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You'll never have to find out." For the first time in a long while, they both smiled easily. It wasn't the kind of happiness that erased pain, but the kind that grew from facing it together. That day carried on like any other, but everything had shifted. Emily noticed small changes. Daniel's laughter when he spoke, the way he no longer avoided eye contact, the lightness in his step. And deep down, she knew that night had given him a new kind of freedom, the permission to simply be himself. As evening fell, Emily found herself reflecting again. Life was full of unexpected turns. She had once feared that silence would build walls between her and her son. Instead, the silence of that night had broken those walls brick by brick until only truth remained. When she looked at Daniel now, she no longer just saw her child. She saw a man standing on the edge of a new path, ready to walk it not with fear, but with courage. And she was proud beyond words. That night, before heading to bed, Daniel paused at her door once more. He leaned against the frame and smiled faintly. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I'll never forget it." Emily's eyes softened. "Neither will I." He lingered for a moment longer before heading down the hall. Emily watched him go, her heart full. The boy she had raised had stepped into manhood not by pretending to be strong, but by daring to show his weakness. And in that, she saw true strength as she turned off the lamp. Emily whispered to herself, "This is the start of something new." And she was right.